Before we get started with today's episode of the podcast, I just want to take a minute to tell you about a free masterclass for dance teachers that I have coming up soon. The NeuroFlex Masterclass, Identifying the Missing Link in Your Dancer's Flexibility, is happening on Sunday, February 2nd. The nervous system is queen when it comes to the body. It controls our ability to see, think, feel, breathe, and move. This means it controls our flexibility and mobility. Nervous system dysregulation is one of the biggest factors limiting a dancer's mobility that most teachers miss. In this masterclass, you'll learn about the link between the nervous system and mobility and how to harness the power of the nervous system to improve your dancer's flexibility. I would love to have you join me on Sunday, February 2nd. So for more information and to save your free spot in the masterclass, you can go to www.allegroperformance.com/masterclass. And now, here's today's episode. Hello, and welcome to the Dance Physio Podcast, a podcast designed to explore ideas and foster discussion around dancer health and wellness. We're here to challenge the status quo, bridge the gap between dance science and the studio, and help change the landscape of the dance industry for the better. I'm your host, Erica Mayall, a dancer turned physiotherapist who is deeply passionate about leaving the dance world better than I found it. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dance Physio Podcast. I am your host, Erica Mayall, and today I am really excited to have a guest for you. I am going to be chatting with Jennifer Milner today. Jennifer is a certified Pilates trainer who specializes in working with dancers and in dance rehabilitation. She is a classically trained ballet dancer and danced with several companies across the country before moving to New York for a career in musical theater. After a knee injury ended her successful performing career, she became determined to use her experiences to help other dancers and performers. She became certified in Pilates and immersed herself in the world of dance rehabilitation as the on-site Pilates trainer at Westside Dance Physical Therapy in New York City. They are the official physical therapist for the New York City Ballet and School of American Ballet and work with loads of performers in New York. She quickly developed a reputation as a knowledgeable, thoughtful, and compassionate trainer, working with a variety of clients from young dancers and gymnasts to Olympic medalists, Oscar winners, world-famous dancers from companies all around the world. Jennifer currently lives in Dallas and continues to work with pre-professional and professional dancers through private Pilates sessions, dance coaching, and presenting lots of workshops and guest lectures on a variety of dance medicine and science topics. I am lucky enough to know Jennifer through both of our involvements with the International Association for Dance Medicine and Science. So we have connected at various conferences around the world, and I'm really excited to chat with her today. So welcome to the podcast, Jennifer.
Thank you. I am excited to have some time to just sit and chat with you too.
Amazing. So just to get started, if you are able, I would love for you to take us back to the very beginning. Little Jennifer, how did you get started in dance, or what are your earliest memories of dancing?
Wow. I don't know that anybody's ever asked me that before. My earliest memories of dancing are my mom teaching me in our house, one hand on the coffee table, and she was a dancer as well. And so, in the very best, nicest, kindest way, she was teaching me, early on for fun, not like you must dance, and I loved it. And so I grew up with her teaching at a dance studio, and just it was very much part of my life, and absolutely adored it. And my sick days, or the days when you stay home from school and you don't feel good, back before On Demand and all that kind of stuff, I would watch a lot of MGM musicals. And so I fell in love with Broadway musicals and movie musicals, and I just loved the way that the dance helped tell the story so much. And so the whole time I was doing ballet, I kind of had this second love. And then I started doing musical theater in my local town, just, community theater and stuff, just for fun. And then moved from there into really diving into musical theater and loving that. So I danced ballet wise probably through high school. I had a back injury that took me out for a while. And that was sort of my pivot point of, am I going to try to dig back deeper and get back into the companies that I was on track with and that sort of thing? Or am I going to pivot to something else? And that was a point at which I decided to pivot to musical theater. So for the rest of my career, I was a pickup dancer for Nutcrackers and things like that, for different companies, but primarily did Broadway musical theater, sort of specializing, of course, as the ballet dancer. So it was really very much a family thing. And my mom loved dancing, obviously, and was a great teacher. And so that kind of sent me into it. And I just haven't stopped.
Amazing. I love that story. I didn't know that your mom was also involved as a teacher. So that's really cool that it sort of continues on with family tradition. Like so many of us, I think, who work in dancer health and wellness, you have obviously experienced injuries, and that knee injury was kind of the end of your performing career, the thing that kind of was a catalyst to moving towards more of a Pilates-based career working in dance rehabilitation. And I'm curious if you can just talk to us a little bit about what that transition looked like or how you made that decision. I think a lot of people, their exposure to those types of modalities when they're trying to rehab their own injuries is what kind of sparks the interest. And I'm just curious if that was the case for you or if it was sort of a different path.
Yeah, well, it was the case for me, but it was for an earlier injury. So while I was in Phantom of the Opera, I was in a car accident, which, greatly messed up my spine. And the doctor I was working with said, well, hey, maybe you should try some Pilates while you're trying to rehab your way back. I kept dancing the whole time. I didn't really miss any shows, but it was definitely an issue for me with my hypermobility. So on her suggestion, I started working in Pilates and really did not like it because she really made me slow down and pull back. And she was like, don't point your feet. Don't feel like you have to do this. Don't be like, let's just focus on small movements. And I was like, I'm a professional dancer. I can do more than that. Which of course is now how all my dancers are when they first work with me. And the humility that I felt when I could not do those simple, small movements, said to me, hey, I'm missing something. So even when I got better from my back injury, I continued to do Pilates. I did it a couple of times a week, still doing 8 shows a week, and really noticed a difference in my health and in my strength and enjoyed it a lot. And so when I had my career-ending injury, I tried to keep that going. And actually had my workers' compensation pay for, they were very great, pay for continuing Pilates as well. And about a year into the rehab, my physical therapist, who also, as you know, is your mental health therapist a lot of times, kind of the front lines of mental health, very, very gently suggested that perhaps I look at it as a side gig to study while I was out injured. It might be something worth getting certified in since I seem to enjoy it so much. And so that sent me in that direction. I got my certification and then getting my certification, asked if I could practice on the PTs at Westside Dance. And Marika said, absolutely, you can do your practice hours on them. And she was watching me do that. And at the end of it, she said, I'd love to offer you a job here. So it was incredibly fortuitous. Like it just sort of fell in line each step of the way, and was that really gentle transition for me from dancer. Got my whole certification thinking at some point I would come back, and then that hard realization of I'm not coming back, but I'm still doing this and I'm still involved in the dance world. I really loved the way that it made me feel like I was dancing still and moving in a way that didn't feel like drudgery and just exercise for the sake of exercise. So it was a very natural transition for me because I started it a couple years earlier.
Yeah. And that's a great story that it wasn't such an abrupt, all of a sudden you lose this one thing and then you're like, what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to what am I going to do to move forward? That it was nice that it was like a bit of a natural transition that had already started, or the process had already started. I know people within the dance medicine community know you as a bit of a specialist with working with dancers with hypermobility and different hypermobility disorders. And I know you also are a co-host of the Bendy Bodies podcast, which focuses on hypermobility and things like that. And I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about how that specialty came about. I know you mentioned your own hypermobility and whether it was something you like sought out to be, really become a specialist in hypermobility, or if it just kind of naturally happened, as a lot of things within the dance world do, that those people just tend to gravitate towards you.
Right. I definitely didn't seek it out, and I knew I had a wonky body. My shoulders dislocate a lot. I had to have one surgically kind of sewn back in the socket. And so I had these few things, but I was never the super flexible girl. So I was never like, I'm super hypermobile. But I did have all these injuries that, looking back, I could now see were, a result of that. But when I started working with dancers, I noticed some of them had these really crazy hypermobile bodies. And I was like, I kind of have that thing. And I would start to problem solve for them in how I would deal with it with myself. And then I had a dancer come to me who was diagnosed with EDS, which is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And I had never heard of it. And so I looked it up and started doing my research. It was incredibly rare. This was probably 2010, maybe. Mm-hmm. And in doing my research, started to learn more about it and wanted to give her the best sessions that I could, and really got interested in digging into that. And then another friend of hers who was wonky, she was like, hey, you should go see Jennifer Milner. She's really helpful with this kind of, and so it became this word of mouth. Yeah. And then in 2017, I think, I was reading some research and read a paper by Dr. Linda Bluestein, and was like, oh, this is so interesting, and the way this fits with this, and blah, blah, blah. So I emailed her and said, hey, can I ask you a few questions? What do you think about this and that? Never met her at anything, but just tracked her down through her institution. And she immediately emailed back and said, hey, let's talk. We got on the phone and talked for like 2 hours. Yeah. And then the rest is history, right? We became really good friends and worked really well together. And so that started to make me more of an expert, because I learned so much from her, even as I was learning for myself, to be able to help other people. And so it's really just grown organically that I started out helping a few people. I recognize myself in them and I can apply that. I have that empathy for it. But then there's so much need for support for hypermobile dancers, and dance medicine, as you know, it's come so far, even just the past like 5 or 6 years, for hypermobility and how we understand it and how we work with it. And so I think it just kind of organically turned into something that I love and support, partly because there weren't a lot of people doing it. And mm-hmm. now just because I love my dancers and I want to help them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has come so far. And I think the majority of people working within that specialization are still people with their own probably lived experience, but we'll see more and more moving forward that it will just become an area that we see more expertise, even with people who are just interested in it and recognize the need for more services within that area who mm-hmm. don't necessarily have their own lived experience. But I think anytime you start to see an area of specialty take off, and we saw this with pelvic floor physical therapy, the people who were the first people driven to like really specialize and be passionate about it usually had their own lived experiences with it. So
absolutely.
I feel like hypermobility and the, hypermobility disorders are sort of still in that area of like the vast majority of people are passionate about it because of, lived experiences and their own personal experience with it.
Absolutely.
I'm going to shift gears just slightly. So obviously people will know from the title of the podcast episode today that I really actually want to focus on chatting about neurodiversity in dancers. And I know that this blends with hypermobility. So my first question is kind of the same as my last question in terms of, whether you kind of came to it organically or if it was a sought out specialization. But the same, you over the last few years have started to really kind of dive into the area of working with dancers with different neurodivergences. And I just wanted to know more about how you got into that area specifically, because I know it's a topic that is also gaining a lot of popularity is not the right word, but a lot more recognition. Mm-hmm. Yes, attraction, recognition in recent years. And it is a podcast topic request that I have been getting a lot recently, which is actually why I brought you on, because it's certainly not my area of expertise. So can you just talk to us a little bit about how that kind of specialty sort of started to emerge?
Sure. And that was also a very organic thing for me. When I was going through this, just a side note, but when I was going through sort of transitioning from dance into what I do now, I went through counseling with Career Transition for Dancers, who are now part of the Actors Fund, I think. And one of the things we talked about was, she said, well, what do you love to do? Like, what do you like to do? And I said, oh, I love to bake. I love to do this. I love that. And she said, okay, now what makes you angry? And I find what makes me angry is a much more motivating thing for me to get out and do things for. And, you know, with hypermobility, what makes me angry is people dismiss them and dismiss their issues and all of that. And so with neurodivergency, it's the same thing. It makes me angry the way neurodivergent dancers are dismissed and ignored and expected to fit into this cookie cutter mold. And so that's why I really started digging into it. I'm definitely not a neurodivergency expert, but I'm definitely an advocate for them. And I'm also neurodivergent. I have OCD as well. So I started getting into it because of my daughter. My daughter, Madeline, has a very high intelligence and also suffered from a lot of anxiety at school. And so we spent a fair amount of her early schooling trying to figure out the best way to help her with school. And we took her for a lot of testing, and they were like, her IQ is off the charts. That's all it is. She's just gifted. Well, now we know gifted is sort of the other side of the coin for neurodivergent, usually autistic. And everybody was like, no, she's fine. She's fine. And I read this book called Autism in Heels, which is about how autism presents in women, and was completely floored by it, and left it lying around for my daughter to read, because that's a much easier way to get people to read.
Suggesting she actually read
it. Saying, you should read this, yeah. And she just picked it up and started reading through it, and she was like, this sounds like me. And she, rather than feeling, you know, any sorts of concern or confusion or worry or anything about it, she got angry. And she was like, wait a minute. This is me. Why do people keep telling me that I'm crazy about this? You know? So she asked to be diagnosed. She asked to go in to be tested for autism. And so the last time we went for testing, we found a place that, was sort of specialized in females. And she ended up being diagnosed with autism in her sophomore year of high school. And that really opened the door to saying, these things aren't little quirks or craziness or weirdness or things that we should try to like train out of her or any of that. And so as we started to be more authentic and deliberate in the way that we interacted with her and in the way that we asked her to interact with us, I started to notice those parallels in the dance classroom and in the dance world. And in my work with hypermobile dancers, you know, there's a huge amount of overlap between hypermobility and neurodivergency. And as Dr. Bluestein and I were sort of digging in and looking at that connection with Dr. Jessica Eccles, who's Dr. Bendy Brain, she's one of the world's, you know, authorities on neurodivergence and hypermobility, it really caused me to really start to go down that rabbit hole of the connections between neurodivergency and hypermobility and the brain-body connection and how those two things are sort of inextricably linked. And as I was doing that, I couldn't, once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. And once you see it, you can't not do something about it. So all the dancers who were getting dismissed or dance teachers would be impatient with them. You know, I've had dance teachers say to me, I've given them that correction 3 times and they're not changing it. They're not fixing it. So I'm just going to stop correcting them. And that to me is like, that's not a failure of the student. It's a failure of the teacher. If they haven't taken that correction after 3 times, either they hate you and don't want to be there, right? Which the odds of that are pretty slim, right? Yeah. Or they don't understand what you want from them or are having trouble getting it out into their body. So it's a failure of the teacher. And I'm guilty of this too. I'm not saying all teachers are failures. It's a failure on our part to communicate correctly or in the way that is best for them.
That they can understand, yeah.
Yep. And so that just made me say, okay, let's do this. Let's talk about it. Let's get it out there and let's help the teachers figure this out.
Yeah. Amazing. And can you just talk really briefly? I know you mentioned like with your daughter, she was sort of undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, partly because it does often present differently in females, and especially autism, but a lot of different neurodiversities, like even ADHD and things like that, present differently in females than males. And like we know, the vast majority of people participating in dance, at least, especially among children and younger dancers, there's a much higher percentage of females than males. So can you just talk a little bit about the differences, or what maybe some of the traits that teachers might see that, you know, might not be the kind of like classic things that people associate with different neurodivergencies?
Sure. Well, the tests, of course, were originally designed for young white boys. And so because my daughter didn't play with trains or trucks, they were like, oh, she's fine. She makes eye contact and holds it very well. And that was one of the things that one of the early people said was, no, she makes eye contact. She has emotions, so she can't be autistic.
Yes.
And of course, she makes eye contact, but at great cost, because she's a very intuitive person, and she can see that it means a lot to people that she make eye contact with them. So she can make eye contact and hold eye contact, but she's so busy thinking about making eye contact and not letting go of the eye contact that she can't hear what you're saying. So if she's paying attention in dance class and being respectful and looking at the teacher, she's missing the combination. But if she looks down at her fingernails, she can hear the combination and absorb it better. And then she's ready to step up and do it. So that's one of the places is that I think girls are sort of trained to be more attentive, polite, with the eye contact and with the manners and that sort of thing. I also think that just because they're not interested in trucks doesn't mean they don't have special interests.
Yeah.
You know, my daughter went so deep into every single kind of mythology you can imagine. And she read front to back Greek, Roman, Norse, Egyptian, African, like super deep studies on all of them. And then went from there into psychology, and from psychology into philosophy. I mean, it was like leap to leap to leap, but it was like deep dive. It's really common for girls, for example, to have a really deep hyperfixation on Disney princesses, which as a society, we're like, oh, that's so cute.
Yeah.
Yay. But they have them all lined up by color and size. Please don't move them. Please don't touch them. You know, I know this sounds crazy, but British history, like the Queens of England, that sort of thing is a really common deep dive in America for autistic females. So it can just look really different for girls, just as ADHD in boys, you know, there's 3 types of ADHD. So in boys, they may be bouncing off the walls and having trouble focusing. And in girls, they may seem really shy and quiet and withdrawn, and they're going into their quiet, happy place and not really paying attention to what's going on because they're processing so many other things. So it can look very different from boys to girls. And again, I'm not the expert. So I don't mean to lump everybody in under those sorts of things, but it can look very different. And for girls, like for example, in ballet class, they love to twirl. So they're stimming, which in ballet class is very appropriate in some ways, right? Getting that energy out and fidgeting. Well, twirling as a 4 or 5-year-old is cute. Twirling as a 12-year-old is, you know, rude and not paying attention.
And not paying attention.
So, exactly. So those small things, or rocking back and forth, it can look like, oh, you just got too much energy, be still. But they're stimming. So that's a few ways that they can sort of look separate from the way that boys sometimes do.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a really good point too, that like in, I don't know, North American especially, but just in societal standards, a lot of things that would be considered maybe more acceptable, or people, it wouldn't draw attention to people, or maybe things that draw some of those girls to ballet in the first place. Like if they're really into Disney princesses and they love to twirl and they love all that, then their parents like, oh, ballet's the perfect outlet for them because it kind of like meets a lot of those criteria. And so potentially we might actually see some of those kids end up like almost in higher numbers in a dance class setting because of some of those traits that are the things that they are like hyperfixated on, if it is, you know, princesses or things like that. So I think that's a really great point. And obviously, like you said, it's not everyone and everyone's going to have different interests and things like that. But I do think that, like you said, you see a lot of those little girls that are just like, just want to be a ballerina and twirl and all of that. And, you know, it's, like you said, really cute when they're little and it's like the perfect setting for them to be in. And then as they progress, then it becomes like, now it's problematic and not so cute anymore. So that's a really great point. My next sort of thing on my little outline was actually to ask you and talk a bit more about a lot of the challenges that those dancers face in like a studio setting or a classroom setting. And I feel like you've covered those like to a big degree, but I do think there's probably some more that a lot of the dancers might face, just in terms of like how much goes on in a classroom in terms of, you know, the different like sounds and stuff. So with music going on, you can often hear competing music from different studios, depending on the layout of like a dance school. You have the teacher's instructions, you have moving bodies everywhere. Do you want to talk just a little bit about what you see commonly and whether it's from like your daughter's experiences or with other students you work with and things that tend to be the most challenging things within like a dance studio setting for some of our neurodivergent dancers?
Absolutely. I know that for my daughter, noise can be a big issue for her. So when she's in college dancing now, and when she would take like a West African class and they would do live drumming, it could be a very big distraction for her and give her like a huge sensory overload and sort of emotionally wipe her out for the rest of the day. And so one of her accommodations is that she can wear ear loops, which are not just earplugs, but they sort of take the decibels down. And so she wears ear loops, and I've encouraged a lot of studios, and I even have a dancer at a company that is allowed to wear ear loops if it's, live piano music or they're running full company or whatever. And it just helps sort of tone it down. You can still hear the teacher. You can still see and understand, like it's not taking anything out, but it kind of it brings it down to a bearable level. So I am a huge fan of things like that. Also, I know that dress code can be an issue. If dancers have sensory issues, a certain leotard that they're required to wear, the tag might be itchy. The seam might feel funky on them. The material might not feel good to them. And that can be so distracting that spends a lot of their emotional, spoons. When we talk about how many spoons do you have left, that can spend a lot of their spoons. So I encourage dance studios to allow them to have some sort of leeway with the dress code and find a leotard that's as similar as possible without having the issues that they have. So that can be a huge one as well. Understanding that neurodivergent dancers, autistic dancers especially, can be very black and white in how they learn and in their issues. And there can be some social cueing that's missed. My daughter is great with dishing out sarcasm, but often doesn't recognize sarcasm. So if I say something sarcastic to her, she's like, why would I do that? Completely like, why would I? So I have to learn how to communicate differently to her. And in the dance studio, there's a lot of unspoken social rules in the dance studio. For example, she might stand at a favorite spot in the bar all the time. And then a guest dancer comes in or an alumni comes back and they go stand at that spot. It's going to be stressful to her, and she's going to think, well, I'll just go ask that person to move, because they probably don't care. They probably don't know. And she doesn't know she's not supposed to. There's a hierarchy, all of that. And so she might ask very reasonably and politely, and then the whole room might be mad at her for making the guest artist feel uncomfortable, but she has no idea all of that's going on. Yeah. Or a dance teacher might say, okay, whoever wants to go across the floor one more time can go across the floor. You don't have to. And she'll be like, great, I don't have to. I don't want to, so I won't. And then they'll be disappointed that she doesn't go across the floor. And she's like, you said I don't have to.
So it's optional.
So that is one of the big things I talk about in my workshop for neurodivergency in dancers is it requires very clear and honest communication. And to say, you do not have to show up for this optional thing tomorrow night, but I would like you to, rather than you don't have to.
No, actually, you do have to.
Yes, exactly. So that's one of the big things I encourage is that transparency of communication for them.
Yeah, and that's huge. And I think across the board in all areas of like life, communication is just like so vital, and so much can be solved by having transparent and open communication. But then obviously with this population, like so much more importance even to be placed on that. You just mentioned your workshop. Do you want to talk a little bit about your latest kind of course, workshop, whatever we're calling it, that you have available right now? I'd love to hear just a little bit more about it. And I'm sure our listeners would too.
It's called Strategies for Supporting Neurodivergent Dancers, and it's an on-demand course that's about just over an hour long, that is on my website, jennifer-milner.com. And I'm super excited about it because it's a little bit of an overview. So Dr. Linda Bluestein is on it and talks for a while about sort of the connection between hypermobility and neurodivergency. Kristen Koskinen is a dance dietitian, and she talks about sort of the link between nutrition and neurodivergency and how you can support that. I talk about working in the classroom, and Kathleen McGuire-Gaines talks about the mental health aspect of it, which is really important and difficult to, it's difficult to address neurodivergency and not address the mental health aspect of it. So I have some dance parents who have bought the course for their studio.
Yeah.
And said, Merry Christmas.
Yes, here you go. Please watch it.
Or dancers who have requested it and had people that they love buy it for them, and then just said, "Gosh, I feel so seen." So it's more of an overview and helps you connect a lot of the dots. But it is a great place, I think, to start because. So another example is dyslexia, which is a type of neurodivergency, right? Mm-hmm. Dyslexia is a difficulty in reading, and it applies to reading. But dyslexic dancers can really struggle in the classroom too. And people don't think about that at all. But if you see a dancer that does the left thumb and finger, and they have trouble telling left from right, it's quite possible that they are dyslexic, and telling them over and over again which hand is left is not going to help them. So I have learned when I teach class to not say go to the left or go to the right, but I say go towards the door or go towards the mirror, and the relief that they feel and not having to wait a split second for everybody else to move is huge. So things like dyslexia and dyscalculia, which is math, really do have real life complications in the dance studio as well. So my biggest issue is I feel like we are missing out on the opportunity to have this really rich input from a population that often doesn't make it all the way to professional because they don't have the support they need. Or once they get to professional, they're constantly struggling to try to just keep up and stay keeping up. And as humans, of course, we owe it to support them. And as people who are trying to enrich the dance world, they have so much to bring to the table, creativity-wise, expression-wise, artistry-wise. There's so much that they have to offer, and I feel like some of our best dancers fall through the cracks because they don't learn the way that other people do. And the more I work on this, the more convinced I am that the dancers who succeed and who are highly successful may not necessarily be the most talented, but they are the ones who have a natural facility, have a natural talent, and learn the way that the dance world teaches the most often.
Yes. And I truly think that happens just in society in general. If you think about
Absolutely.
Just like academic programs and stuff, like I was always successful in school because I was good at taking multiple choice exams, which are such a terrible way of evaluating someone's understanding. And like, I still maintain that I could probably take a multiple choice exam on a topic that I know nothing about and pass it because I'm really good at that type of exam, which really shows nothing about my understanding or knowledge of like a subject matter. And so I think you're 100% right that we lose a lot of talent from the dance world if people don't sort of conform to the traditional ways that things have been run and been taught in the past. But I also think that happens in society, like at a larger level as well. And so we're seeing that all over where we're losing people who would be contributing so much in so many different fields because they just don't conform to how things have been structured in the past. And so really being able to understand that and adapt ways of learning and ways for them to be able to function and succeed in those environments is so important.
Absolutely. Yep. Because, and this is the conversation we're having at Adams, being neurodivergent is not a deficit in some ways. It is absolutely a complication because of the way that society works. But there's also so much they have to offer. And my daughter is she's an advocate for neurodivergency in dance, of course. And so I'm not talking about her behind her back at all. But she will say, I am disabled according to America and according to the standards written in the medical texts. I am a person with a disability. And so I'm not going to be like, it's just a superpower and I'm just cool. It does have its struggles and it does have its complications, but there is also so much that is that is great from it that we just overlook because it's just not, how things normally are done.
Yeah, it's not conforming to societal standards. Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. All right. I am aware of the time and I don't want to take up too much more of your time today, but I really, really appreciate the conversation. And I know just from our chats at IADAMS and like the conversations happening in the greater dance medicine and wellness community, that this is certainly a topic that we are going to continue to be talking about for a long time. And hopefully we'll see lots of progress and more understanding of how we can support these dancers in the dance community. Before we log off, I have 5 sort of rapid fire questions that I like to ask guests at the end of every episode, if you're game to play along with me for that.
I will try. Okay, here we go.
These have nothing
very competitive, so
there's no right or wrong answer. Like I said, they're meant to be fun, so they are challenging, but don't worry too much about it, and they don't have to be just like a single word answer. But first question. What is your favorite genre or style of dance? I know you talked about it a bit at the beginning, but I'm curious what your favorite is.
Yeah, I feel like it's still musical theater. It's so all-encompassing for me, and I absolutely love it.
Amazing. Would you rather be on the stage or in the studio?
Ooh, where my favorite place, one of my favorite places in the world is in the wings. I feel like there is so much potential right there for so much magic to happen. And when I'm standing in the wings waiting to go on, or I've been on and I'm watching my friends, like that moment before you enter the magic bubble, it just feels like this possibility is just endless. So my favorite place to be, honestly, is in the wings.
Amazing. You're the first person to answer or to have that answer. I love that. All right. If you could dance or share the stage with any dancer, past or present, who would it be and why?
Oh, gosh.
I didn't say the questions were easy.
No, the questions are not easy. Present or past. I mean, if I could share the stage like right now, like I would choose no one because I don't really dance anymore. And I would be like horrified that I asked my, star friend, favorite, whatever, to be on stage with me. I mean, there's Baryshnikov, of course, because his artistry and how hard he has pushed himself and who he is as a person today is super incredible. But also Maria Talchief has always been one of my favorites. And there's so much about her that I still don't know. And people like that really, really interest me. And I would love to, just from the videos I've seen, I would love to be on the stage with her. And then, of course, hands down, Gene Kelly.
Amazing. You got your top 3 dancers you'd want to
yes, I can't limit it. Sorry.
No, that's totally fine. All right. What's one thing that you would go back and tell your younger self as a dancer?
Oh, wow. The thing that I struggled with the most as a younger dancer was fear of not being who they wanted me to be or who they needed me to be. And that fear held me back so much that I often tried to walk in and show myself as a blank canvas. Like, I'll be whatever you need me to be, and you can mold me and shape me however you want. And what I learned towards the end of my career is that they don't want to see a blank canvas. They want to see you. And I always tell my dancers, you're not the canvas, you're the paintbrush. So just go in there and show them what kind of a paintbrush you are. And if they don't hire you, it's on them. Like, you're just not the right fit. So I wish I could tell myself not to be fearless, because I know that's stupid and, just don't be afraid. But to understand that I have worth and someone wants what I have to offer, and don't be afraid to show that.
Yeah, I love that. All right, last question. If there was one thing that you could change about the dance world, what would it be?
Girl. Do I get a top 10 list?
Sure. I mean,
top. I know. It is, oh gosh. Diversity, equity, inclusion on every single level. We've come so far in the past 5 years. I can't believe people are still arguing over the color of tights and point shoes, and whether or not partnering is for a man and a woman, or, like those sorts of things. I still can't believe we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And I wish that we could find a way to honor what is good about the dance world. And I'm talking about the ballet-based, Western-based dance world, right? Because that's where my knowledge is. That we could honor what's good about it and understand that it's okay to let go of the other things, because there's a really big difference between tradition and habit. And I think traditions should be chosen deliberately and with care, and habits aren't always good habits. And the habit of pink tights, or the habit of the hair having to be pulled back in a tight bun, even if you do not have straight, Anglo-Saxon hair to pull, like those sorts of things just drive me nuts. And the habit of making eye contact and that sort of thing. So I would like to take what is good and beautiful and amazing about Western-based dance and be able to respectfully let go of the things that are not. So I'm a big fan of saying, let's take the music from Sleeping Beauty and let's take the dance steps from Sleeping Beauty and maybe rewrite the story. Or buy a dare. Like, let's talk about that. So we love the music, we love the dance steps. The story's weird anyway. Well, that's why I keep it. So that's what I would change, is how can we respect where we've come from and keep what is important and beautiful, and make sure there's room for everyone who wants to be at the table and understand it's ballet. There's a certain level of technique you have to hit, all of that stuff, right? But make sure that everybody has a seat at the table.
Amazing. I love that so much. And I think that's a great place to end things on. But just quickly before we sign off, if people want to connect with you or find out more about your courses or your work or any of that, what is the best way that they can do that?
So you can find me on Instagram at Jennifer.Milner, Milner. And my website is Jennifer-Milner.com. So you can find me there, and there's a link for courses, workshops, live events, all of that stuff. And of course, hopefully, I will see some people in September at iAdams in Las Vegas.
Yes, absolutely. I will be there. And I will put those links in the show notes for the podcast episode as well. So if anybody's looking for those, I will link Jennifer's website and her Instagram in the show notes. So
great. Oh, and sorry, if you have any questions about autism or anything like that, of course, absolutely reach out to me. I can try to help you point you towards resources. I can guide you towards Autism in Heels or the Autism Assessment Guidebook, things like that are great starting places. And I can also point you towards some actually autistic Instagram pages so that you can learn from people who actually are that way or have neurodivergencies as well.
Amazing. Well, on that note, thank you so much for being here today. It is amazing to connect with you. And I think that this is such an important topic for us to just raise more awareness of in the dance world. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be with me. I also appreciate everybody for listening today. Like I said, let's keep the conversation going. So if this is something that resonates with you, hopefully you can take this back to your own studio and your own dancers, and we can continue this conversation and create lasting change within the dance world. So thank you so much for being here today, everyone. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.